Okay, I just want to welcome everybody. I expect we'll have more people kind of coming in as we go, but I do want to keep us on our schedule. We are recording tonight's presentation, so if you want to review it at any time or if you want to share it with some other people after this evening, you can please feel free to do that. We would encourage it. We'll send you the link sometime over the next couple of days. Welcome. My name is Susan O'Handley. I am one of our 3 co-presidents for the Delaware Otsego Audubon Society. And our program this evening is part of our climate action initiative that we undertook starting last year. We actually got a grant from National Audubon Society's Audubon in Action program for some climate leadership presentations. And one of our goals is to actually see some projects start in our region that can address climate change. And certainly, you know, we were notified in early March of 2020 and pretty much immediately got shut down on any of our in-person workshops and seminars that we had planned for that first year. So we put things on hold for a while and then decided in October that we really wanted to get moving on some of this information because climate change is such an important issue. And environmentally, it just has impacts in like everywhere. So one of the first things that we're doing is looking at climate change, and one of the big things that impacts that is carbon. So our carbon emissions and our carbon footprint. We had presentations in October and November, and many of you tonight participated in those. If you haven't seen it, we would encourage that as well. It is on our website, and I'll show you how to find that later on in the program towards the end. But the presenter, Dr. Chandu Viswesharya, is here with us tonight. So if you were attending that program and you did have questions, or if you watched the video and had questions, this is a good time this evening to ask some of those. Our program in October and November on the webinar, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again here. Basically, you should be able to see that now. It basically focuses on these different areas where we can start to reduce carbon. And our panel tonight is comprised of people in our local area and also in our region that have expertise in these areas. And that is pretty much what we're going to address. If you have questions as we go through tonight's presentation discussion, kind of overview, kind of digging in a little bit deeper into each of these topic areas, please use the question answer button on your control panel in Zoom. It'll say Q&A and it looks like little chat bubbles. You can ask your question there. Our moderators for this evening, Charlie Scheim, Catherine Davino, Becky Gretton, are here. They'll be monitoring that question answer panel so that we can relay questions kind of as they come up through tonight's program. So we're looking at basically, oh, how'd that happen? I don't know how that happened. My screen share kind of went a little berserk there. Went back to my video. So basically, what we want to look at is, reducing your carbon can save you money, it can protect the environment, it can improve your health. And those 3 things I think are going to be the big draw for a lot of people participating. I wish we had, the cute little saw-whet owl to help promote our programs on climate change, because the response to, the Rockefeller owl just went nuts. And I'm sitting here trying to push climate change information and getting like such disparate responses. So it's hard to make climate change sexy as a topic. I'd love to be able to do it. But the fact is, I think saving money and protecting the environment and improving our health is going to be the avenue to get people to listen and perhaps make some of these changes. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is just go through each of our panelists and have them do a quick introduction for themselves. And then I'm going to stop sharing my screen here now. And then we will kind of go into some introductory questions that have been submitted in advance. And in the meantime, we're going to keep an eye on those questions and answers, so that if there's anything that people tonight are interested in knowing or learning more about, we can kind of give those topics and those questions some time for answers. So first on the list is Chandu. So please unmute and introduce yourselves, and we'll go from there.
Great. Thank you, Susan. It's my pleasure to be here. My name is Chandu Vishveshwaraya. My day job is that I run a small software company in the wind and solar energy space, which is what I did after a 28-year career at IBM. My night job is that I'm the vice president of a not-for-profit called Cure 100, which stands for Communities United to Reduce Emissions 100%. And we work with communities and help them to target net zero carbon emissions by the year 2040. Back to you, Susan.
Thank you. Next, we have Amy Wyant.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Wyant. I am the executive director at the Otsego County Conservation Association and one of the Clean Energy Community. Wow, I forgot my title. That's great. It's a great way to start, isn't it? A community coordinators, there we go, which is working with municipalities throughout the Mohawk Valley region on trying to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you, Amy. Tom, how do you pronounce your last name? Oh, you're muted. Unmute.
Sorry, Tice. It's a German pronunciation.
Tice. Okay. So, I knew I wouldn't do it correctly, so I'm glad I asked.
Right. So, well, thank you for asking. So I had a 38-and-a-half-year career with IBM, so even longer than Chandu's. I tried to be a professor at Columbia University for 2.5 years, but I decided that wasn't the right retirement gig. And I'd had a long, decades-long interest in green technology, and particularly in the subject of global warming. I won't tell you stories about that, but I'm just very happy to be working with Chandu and others at Utopus Insights on the subject of new and better ways to use wind, solar, and energy storage and batteries to replace fossil fuels and combat climate change.
Thank you, Tom. We're glad to have you with us. Bennett.
Sorry, I should have had my finger on the button. My name is Bennett Sandler. I'm the campaign director for HeatSmart Mohawk Valley, previously HeatSmart Otsego. I never worked for IBM ever. But in a previous life, I was actually trained as an ecologist and spent a lot of time actually studying birds in various places far away, and many years ago, truthfully. But for 10 years, I was actually a home performance contractor here in Otsego County. I worked with a couple other fellows. I did energy audits on residential small commercial buildings, and have parlayed that into the HeatSmart campaign, which works to help building owners, residential and commercial, figure out ways to take advantage of beneficial electrification, how to get off fossil fuels, get onto electrified heating and cooling systems that can take advantage of the supply, renewable energy supply that Shandu and Thomas are talking about. So I'm working on the other side, actually trying to get folks over to electrified heating and cooling systems as a way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So back to you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Bennett. Shane, you're up.
Thanks. I'm Shane Digan. I am a recycling coordinator and a planner with the Otsego County Planning and Solid Waste Department. It's a joint department, but in the half of the job that's solid waste, I oversee the county's recycling program, work on things like food waste, electronic waste, recycling, go to events, try to find new markets for stuff. And I do not have a long career. I graduated from SUNY Oneonta in 2019, so I'm here to learn as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us, Shane. We're happy to have you here too. Ellen, unmute.
I think I'm unmuted. I'm Ellen Pope, Executive Director of Otsego 2000. We are an environmental and preservation advocacy nonprofit. We define our environment as fairly holistically. That doesn't include just the air and water and soil, but also our economy and our built environment. And so we have been strong proponents of shopping locally, of supporting local merchants and especially local farmers with the Cooperstown Farmers Market, which is a major program of ours. It's a year-round market. And we believe that all of this has to work together in order for us to have a sustainable, local, strong quality of life and strong environment and strong economy.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ellen. I'm glad you're here. Danny.
Thank you, Susan. Good evening, everybody. My name is Danny Lappin. I wear many hats, but for the sake of this presentation, I am the environmental planner with the Otsego County Conservation Association. I actually worked with Shane when he was still in school back in 2019, and he's done amazing work and continues to do great work. I've also worked with Amy before she started with OCCA, when she was still the Clean Energy Communities Coordinator over at MVED, and now she's here and has catapulted OCCA into the climate and resiliency planning space. I'm a nationally certified planner with the American Planning Association, received that certification in 2019, and I run our organization's Circuit Rider Planner program. I act as an ad hoc municipal planner for our county's many municipalities, and recently we've expanded our planning services to the surrounding counties as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Appreciate that. I think, Charlie, do you want to start out with some of our prepared questions? And we'll go from there. Oh, you're muted.
The first thing to ask Shandu would be, why is carbon tracking an important first step in this whole process?
Great, thanks for that question, Charlie. We all understand that we have to reduce carbon. We all understand that the future of the planet depends on it. We also understand that this is an urgent imperative, and the sooner we can take some action, the more benefits we'll get from it, because any emissions that we create stay in the atmosphere for a long time. So if this is an important problem and a compelling challenge of our generation, well, then you cannot improve something if you cannot measure it. So if you were a diabetic, let's say, and you have to control your blood sugar, imagine if you couldn't even measure it. Imagine if you didn't know if it was high or low, so you could adjust your dosage, etc. Well, it's the same thing with carbon. First of all, there's a currency for measuring carbon. It's tons of CO2 equivalent per year. Well, that's a currency we need to get very familiar with. We should be able to imagine, what does 1 ton mean? Is it a lot? Is it a little? What is my own impact? How much can I reduce it, etc.? So it's imperative that we measure it and we get fluent in the currency of these measurements. If I asked you to manage a budget, but you couldn't tell a dollar bill from a $100 bill or from a $10 bill, could you manage the budget? No. Well, if you don't know the difference between 1 ton and 100 tons of carbon, are you going to actually reduce carbon? No. So to me, the importance of tracking and measuring carbon is to understand the sources of carbon, understand the low-hanging fruit to reduce carbon, get help and tips on how to reduce carbon, and use the tracker as a constant companion as we decarbonize. This is a 20-year marathon. We all have to get to zero carbon, and we need help to measure and track our progress along the way. It's like saying I want to lose weight, but I don't have a weighing machine. Well, how would you know that you even did something if you can't measure it? So I consider this a carbon tracking mechanism absolutely basic to our efforts, Charlie.
Thank you. Some people have wondered, though, if they use this carbon tool that the Delaware-Otsego Audubon has on their website, what are people going to do with the data, and is privacy protected, that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And anytime somebody asks you to enter some information on the web, you should be very careful and ask yourself, wait a minute, who's going to see this data and what are they going to do with it? The good news here is that the carbon tracker that the Audubon Society is offering is developed and maintained by Cure 100, the not-for-profit on whose board I serve. And we take privacy very, very seriously. First of all, you can go to our website, cure100.org, and read our privacy policy, which is published there. Second, we promise to take any data that you give us when you use the carbon tracker and treat it in complete confidence as though it were our own data. So this will not be given to anybody, not sold to anybody in any form or fashion. The only information that we gather at the back end or at the database of this whole app is that we look at broad averages, like what is the carbon impact per person in this town or in this county, and how much has it reduced over the last 6 months or 6 years or whatever, and what fraction of people have oil furnaces versus gas furnaces versus heat pumps, and how many of those people that have heat pumps have ductwork in their house to distribute forced air. So we do gather information at the back end, which is completely anonymized and average in nature, which is extremely useful information to people who are running environmental programs. But the only person that can actually see individual information is the person with the master password to the backend database. And this is very, very carefully controlled. So I would like to put at rest anybody's fears or concerns that their information might get exposed. Let's also be clear, we don't have anybody's bank information or net worth information. It's more like, what kind of car do you drive? How many miles do you drive per year? What kind of furnace do you have? How many gallons of oil do you burn per year? It's that kind of information. Nonetheless, we treat it very, very carefully.
Susan, should I address other speakers as well as I
Yes.
go through the questions?
Yep. Do you want to switch to Becky for the next set?
Sure thing. Becky, take it away.
All righty. Amy. Hi, Amy.
Hi. Let's hope I do better this time and know what my title and answer the questions I'm here to answer this time. Sorry about that.
All right then. How do community solar projects work?
Very great question, Becky. So I actually have sent Susan a quick visual to give us a little bit of overview information on how a community solar project works. So community solar is, go ahead and share it, Susan, whenever you can. Community solar is a solar project that is actually developed usually kind of out in a field. So there's some of these larger projects that you'll see in areas. And when you're looking at this little diagram here, so number one is our actual solar installation. Now, the way it works is the solar installation produces energy, and those electrons are added back to the grid. So that's what that connection number two is there, is taking that energy and putting it on the grid. And then the really interesting and exciting part for most community members who participate in this is that you do not actually have to change how you're receiving your energy. You don't have to add any panels to your home. And for a lot of the projects, there's absolutely no upfront cost. So that's number three, where you're seeing that connectivity that looks very similar to it does right now. So if you're using NYSEG or National Grid, you know, someone who's delivering your energy at this point, you work the same way. But with community solar, these projects have been subsidized by a lot of different, so by the state. And so you can actually get a savings. So you have a monetary savings by signing up for energy through a community solar project. Now, you don't get the actual electrons necessarily that are created in the solar project, but as the solar project runs, it actually creates credits that are then connected directly to your energy bill. So if you have, and different projects do it slightly differently. There was some new legislation that came through not that long ago that's allowing community solar projects to move to a single billing, which is wonderful, because you may have heard in the past that there's a little, you know, there can be two bills in the old way that they did community solar, but in this new form, and some community solar projects are already going this route, you'll receive your normal, let's use a NYSEG bill as an example. And what you'll see is your actual usage and then the credits that you earned by being part of this community solar project, which will take usually somewhere between 10 and 15% off the cost of your actual NYSEG bill, and you pay it as normal. So that's the kind of the basic way that community solar works. You don't have to install anything on your property. And so this is fantastic for people who rent, people who have a lot of tree cover, or just an aging infrastructure of their home where the roof cannot support rooftop solar. So it's a really neat way to allow a lot more people to have access to solar energy. And that also for some projects includes small businesses, large businesses, and even municipalities. So there's some really some neat ways for allowing solar to kind of get further out to a more variety of folks who wouldn't normally be able to access solar.
And how easy is it to sign up for this program?
So for most programs, Becky, it's really just putting in some quick information on a website, name, address, NYSEG account number, and they'll actually check your eligibility to see if there's a solar project within your vicinity, because there's some regionality to solar projects like this. You have to be within what they call a load zone. So that you are in the same area as your actual project. So they'll check that eligibility, and then as soon as you're signed up and ready to go, you will actually just start receiving that credit. What they do when you put in your, like we're using NYSEG as our example here, when you put in your billing information, they'll actually look back on about a year's worth of information to get an average of what your electrical usage is, so that they can assign enough solar panels to your home that will be creating. So they say, we've used this much, you know, you use this much electricity normally. So we're going to make sure that in our big picture installation that there's enough solar panels to produce approximately that much energy for you, so you can get that offset.
Thank you.
One of our participants has asked the question, can renters be part of community solar, or is that only for property owners?
It is absolutely for renters and property owners, Charlie. So anyone who is paying a utility bill, there are some restrictions if you're using a particular ESCO, but most folks who pay their regular utility bill to NYSEG or National Grid will be able to absolutely participate in a community solar project. And Susan has a couple of links that she'll make available. If folks are interested, there is right on NYSERDA's website, you can put in where you live, you know, area, and it'll give you, and also your utility. So if you're using NYSEG, National Grid, or what have you, and they will let you know, perfect, thank you, Susan. let you know what community solar folks are available in your area and have a direct link to their website to get connected. And they range. So part of the thing that they put right here on their website is you should do a little research, take a look at, some of them are going to have different percentage rates. Usually it runs somewhere between 10 and 15%, depending on who they are. Some of them will have incentives, that they'll add a gift card if you sign up, or they'll add, lots of different things, but it is for renters. It is for homeowners. There's also, like I said, for small business owners. And then some of the companies actually, what they do usually is they have what they call an anchor tenant. So they can put some larger businesses or municipalities as kind of the when they're getting a project off the ground, to be able to add those in too. So it's not automatic that some people are just not available. It is, we just have to find the right person, right? Find the right group who has a project coming online to make sure that we can get different folks into these community solar projects.
And
Amy?
generally, are there any additional costs that come along with that?
So it depends. Most projects now do not have additional costs. No, there used to be lots of different ways that it was when it first got started, where there was some folks would do credit checks and things along those lines. Many of the projects that are coming online now do not even include that, but they have ways to make things available for a variety of consumers. Shandu, it sounded like you had a question or something to jump in as well.
I just wanted to add a quick point. Thanks, Amy. We just did a community solar project in the village where I live, and it was a true win-win-win-win. The solar was put on the roof of a Department of Public Works building, and the village gets rent from the developer. So that's a win. Mm-hmm. Secondly, we signed up 46 families to get community solar, and it turns out they save money on their electric bill from day one. So that's a win. Thirdly, the clean electricity gets into the grid as you described and helps the environment. So that's a win. And fourthly, as a nonprofit, we signed up 46 families and we got a small referral fee for each of them, mm-hmm. which is helping our nonprofit. I mean, how cool is that? That was a win-win-win-win.
Absolutely, and that's what I mean by different programs or different developers are running slightly different programs. There are quite a few that do just that, where if you partner with a non-for-profit, the non-for-profit can actually receive some incentive for each community or each household that you've connected.
Amy, another one of our participants asked, if one owns land, how can you become a host for such a project, or can you?
That is a great question, Charlie. So that is, many of these community solar developers actually have portions of their websites right there. So if you have land and you are interested, there are a few pieces that are important when you're trying to set up solar. So you do need three-phase electrical. You need to be relatively close to a connectivity point in the grid. And you do usually, some nice south-facing, space that has easy accessibility, but there's a variety of things that are available. But most programs, if you can go to the same website we've got here for folks, and if you go right to their website, they'll say, do you have land? Click here and you can actually submit some information, and those companies will take a look and see if it's eligible.
I have a chat to you, Amy. The writer says, I read that community solar in New York State is used by utilities as part of their requirement to include renewables in their energy portfolio, but they really are riding the coattails of the community solar developers without making this commitment. The writer says, I still use community solar as I believe it still advances solar overall, but the utilities should not be allowed to use this double counting benefit.
So that would be something we'd probably go a little more in depth with, that has to do with crediting and how we use our clean energy credits. So I think that as long as, if we are able to use the community solar to have that multiple win scenario that Shandu was talking about, There are other things that we still have to work on.
Okay.
Yeah, there's always something else
Nice.
to work on. But like you said, that marathon, we got to get each step as we keep going. But we will definitely, let me tell you, in my community group for the Clean Energy Community Coordinators, it comes up more often than you would think in conversation. So don't worry, people have got their eye on it.
And Shandu, thank you for addressing that too to the writer. Appreciate that. Should we move on to Tom?
Yep.
Take it away,
Who
Becky.
wants?
Would you like me
What?
to do this? Would you like me to?
Yes, please.
Sure.
Okay,
That would be great.
thank you. So Tom, how many miles can your car go before you have to charge it? What do you do on long trips? I guess it's a two-part question.
Okay, so first, let me start by saying that there are three kinds of electric vehicles. There are hybrid vehicles, which have gasoline engines and a relatively small motor and battery that provides an assist and improves the average mileage, but those just go to a gas station as usual. Then there are plug-in hybrids, which have larger batteries and can run for perhaps 25 to 40 miles before they have to kick over or kick in the gasoline engine. And those, again, if you remember to plug them in every night and you're only driving, say, 20 or 40 or 50 miles in a day, you're going to get very good mileage. My wife got routinely 125 miles per gallon average on her Prius Prime and didn't fuel it more than once or twice a month at a gasoline station, maybe not even that much. And then, of course, I think the question's really about what we call the battery electric vehicle, the vehicle that has no gasoline engine, has no pollution. And by the way, they have amazing torque, handling, and other properties. They're extremely safe because the battery's in the bottom of the car. It's very hard to tip them over in an accident, so they have the highest safety rating. So they're wonderful cars, but people worry about how far can I drive it? Well, the newer ones, and it depends on the maker, but I was just looking at a Kia Niro, which is sort of a mid-range electric vehicle. Very nice technology, not very well, not a fancy car inside. 239 miles EPA range is the nominal range. The Teslas are all in the 300. Well, the shortest range Tesla that you can buy right now would be 275 miles. And that's still a relatively expensive car. The longer range Teslas range from 326 miles for the small SUV and up to over 400 miles for the Model S. Once you have a car like that, the thing to remember is you're never going to stop at a gasoline station. You're going to be charging it overnight in your driveway or in your garage if you have a garage. I would talk to the landlord first if you're in an apartment and there's no way to charge the car conveniently where you live. I would talk to the landlord first and see if it would be possible to put in a 220 volt outlet so that you could conveniently charge it overnight. It takes a few hours. It happens while you're asleep. You tell the car when you want it to charge. Do it during the hours when the electricity rates are reduced. And for that, occasionally when you go on a long trip, an interstate trip or so forth, a real long trip over, say, 250 miles, then you stop at a roadside charger. The charging stations that you see, the high power capacity charging stations, the ones that can charge your car in 10 minutes to a half an hour, those are only for long distance travel. So how often you would need to stop at a station like that on the highway depends on how often you travel trips that are longer than, let's say, if you have a 300-mile range car, then let's say 250 miles. My wife and I have found that with her Tesla Model 3, which is getting to be an old one now, it only has 310 miles EPA range. It's so much better than having a gasoline vehicle. Just never having to go to the gasoline station to pump gasoline is just such a great trade-off for when you do take a long trip, stopping, having a cup of tea, walking the dogs while the car charges for 20 minutes. So I don't know, it's a long answer to the question. I think the short answer is don't worry about it. It's really not a problem with these modern EVs.
And it seems to me that the marketplace for electric vehicles and hybrids, like there's different stages of vehicle choices, but it looks just in the marketplace that's changing so rapidly with options coming, this year from pretty much every manufacturer will have some kind of electric or hybrid vehicle available for purchase. So
absolutely. So the only reason to wait is if you're put off by the initial purchase price, and those prices are dropping so rapidly that you won't have to wait long. You might have to wait 2 or 3 years before the initial purchase price is lower than a equivalently equipped gasoline vehicle. But consider if you are put off by the initial purchase price, consider buying a used electric vehicle, or keep in mind also that the operational costs are very, very low. They're incredibly inexpensive. You're going to save something like $1,000. Let's say you do 20,000 miles a year in a car. You're going to save over $1,000 a year on the reduction in the cost of fueling the car from electricity compared to gasoline. The maintenance costs are also amazingly low because there's no oil to change. There's no the brakes don't wear out because the motor assists with the braking when you relax your foot from the gas pedal and so forth. So I would say that in our experience, the total cost of ownership looks like it's going to be less than a gasoline vehicle that would be quite a bit less money. It looks like the total cost of ownership for, as I said, a relatively expensive Tesla Model 3 is less than the previous cost of ownership we saw with Prius Prime, and before that, all the way back to 2007, Prius, which is a hybrid electric vehicle. And I guess the question was really about new cars. Keep an eye on the Volkswagen. It's called ID.3 and ID.4. One's a sedan, one's an SUV. They're just poised to enter the US market. Those are going to be coming in at a very good price point, and they're still eligible for the tax incentive because Volkswagen just hasn't been serious about this up till now, and they haven't sold enough to get to the 500,000 limit where that incentive goes away. And I believe that that Tesla and other vehicle manufacturers will also cut prices in the first half of the year, just because of that new competition coming into the market. So, and there's every kind of vehicle you could want. SUVs, hatchbacks, squarebacks. There'll be 4 or 5 trucks entering the market this year or next. And sedans, there are plenty of those as well.
Nice.
Well,
Could you address
considering,
battery life on these things?
I'm sorry, what's the battery life?
Yes.
Okay. I think there was a problem with battery life on the Leaf, the Nissan Leaf, which is the granddaddy of all the modern electric vehicles. That's because it didn't have a cooling system for the battery, and they've improved that a lot. But I would say that many of the competitive model, I would say all the competitors that I know of, the longer range vehicles, all have better systems for managing the battery temperature when it's charging or when the car is operating under stressful, high highway speeds and so forth. Again, I don't want to make this into an advertisement for Tesla, but they are the only company I know that releases the data, and they track every car that they've ever manufactured, and some Teslas are showing battery life of 200 and 250,000 miles. The ones that have gotten that far, those are old ones that were built around 2012, 2013, and so forth. The battery will lose perhaps 10 to 15% of its initial capacity, so 10 to 15% of its range at a range of about 200,000 miles. So
wow.
it does not wear out in the sense that a gasoline engine does. It doesn't die. It gradually fades until you decide that, gee, I could buy one of these newer cars that has 2 or 3 times the range. So I think I'll do that. And
One of the questions that, since you're talking about battery, and we all live in the great Northeast where it's pretty cold right now, somebody would like to know what happens to the battery, if anything, when it's cold outside.
the great news is, if you live in a place that's really cold, and I used to go skiing in Vermont, and it would be 30 degrees below in the morning, and I always was crossing my fingers and saying a little, incantation to try to help the car start. You don't have to worry about that with a battery electric vehicle. If it's a pure battery electric vehicle, it doesn't care how cold it is. It's just going to go. It's never going to get stuck on a cold morning. The bad news is that you're going to lose some of the range. Now, you lose some of your range in an electric vehicle. You just don't notice it because in a gas, I'm sorry, you lose, my wife just corrected me. Thank you, Celeste. Thank you, dear. You lose some of your range in a gasoline vehicle in the winter as well, for complex reasons, but you lose more in an electric vehicle. So we've seen on the coldest day of winter in this region, my wife took a trip to Albany when her car was new and we didn't know anything about it, and it lost about 20 to 25% of its range once the battery cooled off. The good news is Tesla has upgraded the operating software in the car to ameliorate some of that problem, and the newer cars have an improved cabin heating system, so that range reduction is now less in the newer cars. Again, I don't want to make this an advertisement for Tesla. There are other vehicles, Hyundai, the Kia Niro. I'm sure the Volkswagen vehicles are good in this respect as well. So it's just something you have to watch out for. If you have a long range vehicle with 250 or 350 miles of range, it really is not an issue.
The last question that I've got, I think, before we should move on to somebody else, is what about insurance? Does the insurance company charge you more or less than a gas operated vehicle?
Celeste, would you say that we get charged more or less? You want to join us here, dude?
I think, hi. I think our insurance rates went up when we initially bought the car, but I think only because it was a new car. I don't think, that there's any differential between, insurance, between a gas engine car and an electric car.
Not any significant difference.
Yeah.
It's again, it was an expensive purchase when we did it. You can get them for much less now. But I think I was surprised that the insurance rate didn't go up more than it did, because the car was much more expensive than the car that we traded in.
Right.
On
Prius.
the afterlife part of this, we did have somebody ask if the batteries are recyclable.
The problem is the batteries are lasting so long that, and the cars are so new, that a real recycling market hasn't fully developed. But there are many companies that are setting up now to do battery recycling. But what they're working with basically is lithium-ion batteries that are used in electronics, because they just don't have a steady stream of batteries coming from the vehicles yet. But it will be. The other thing that's happening is that if a car is involved in a crash of any sort, and there are millions of electric vehicles on the roads, so some of them are getting involved in crashes. They're actually safer than gasoline vehicles in a crash. I'll say that many times over. But if the battery's not really damaged, then it's going to be salvaged, because people use them to retrofit older cars and turn them from gasoline vehicles into electric vehicles. It's a hobby. I actually have a cousin that does that, and has an old used Tesla that he bought. That's his main car, and he has another vehicle, I forget what it is, and he just buys batteries and has fun wiring it up.
Wow. All right. I think we'll probably shift over to some starting questions for Bennett from here. I know basically we're definitely going to go over the hour. An hour was kind of a general time frame, but I know that there's just so much content here, and we want to make sure that we have a chance to address questions and kind of get everybody in here as we can. So please stay late if you can. If not, then come back for a recording, or we'll do continuation with some people this evening. Bennett, you can go ahead and unmute. And I know that when we had spoken, you had talked about the importance of the energy audit as like the solid first step for any kind of movement in your, building, heating and cooling. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how does someone get started, and
Sure.
the recommendations, and maybe cover a little bit about, like the rural households in our communities and kind of what options are available?
Yeah, love to. So it's a little hard for me. I usually take an hour to talk about a myriad of technology, the value proposition, the myriad of incentives and programs that exist.
Yeah, I think we'll do that separately.
We may need to do that, and you can certainly hit the website. But there's been an interesting. So we've you're right about the audit, right? And Chandu sort of hit on this before, right? And until you sort of quantify the problem, it's a little hard to know how best to invest in fixing it, right? It takes a little money to save a lot of money. And so the energy audit for whatever building you have, residential or commercial, is really a fundamental place to start. And most buildings, right, are best served by following a common pathway that starts with the energy audit. And to their credit, New York State, through a myriad of different programs, provides energy audits at either no cost or very low cost for most building owners, right? And so we would certainly encourage folks to start there if they haven't had one done before, or they haven't built a really high performance home that they know is not bleeding energy in one way, shape, or form. So, rather than sort of walk through a host of visuals, etc., I would encourage folks to either reach out directly to me or go to our website. I hate to sound like a shill, but because there's a lot of information that could be that we can provide and without taking up other panelists' time, suffice it to say that audits are free. They're really a great place to start. They typically will include, right, a list of potential improvements, what they cost, what the savings, what the simple payback would be, what a financial investment return on investment might be, and it becomes a roadmap. So even if you know you can't afford to do anything that comes out of the energy audit, have it done. At least it allows you to plan for the future. And so, yeah, I'm a real strong advocate of that.
I know, like, the whole issue of the older home with no ductwork. Like, if someone wants to transition off of fossil fuels, you know, in the long term, is that something that is feasible or?
Absolutely. So ductwork is not a requirement. Heat pumps, right? So again, I would usually spend a lot of time talking about how heat pumps work and why they're so good. And truthfully, actually, I can't help myself. I have a graphic that I want to present because it, to me, is sort of the let me see if I can get there while I'm talking at the same time. It's not usually something that I can do, but this is essentially, right, the breakdown. It's a single house and what these different types of heating fuels cost to heat this house for a year. Okay, and you can see the propane. Now, this was based on data out of Maine, and energy prices are a little different here, so you'll get some shifting in relative, in order here. But propane and electric resistance heat are your most expensive ways of heating a building. And in rural areas, we don't have natural gas, right? So right there, you have a systemic a cost hurdle, right, for rural areas. And we all know the woodchucks, right, save a heap of money, but it takes a lot of sweat equity. And air source and ground source heat pumps get you there, right? And so you can begin to see what an annual operating cost savings for having a heat pump is relative to the more expensive fossil fuel systems. You are not, and to get to specifically to your question, you're not restricted to a ducted system in order to take advantage of heat pump technology. So air source and ground source heat pumps are flavors of the same technology, and within each of those iterations, there are different ways of connecting to either existing or providing new and relatively inexpensive distribution systems that allow you to, right? So you can take advantage of, there are heat pumps that make water, warm water. And so you can connect to hydronic systems. I'm not going to belabor the reasons why there may be obstacles to that. You may still need to upgrade some of your hydronic distribution system in order to play nicely and take advantage of the energy savings of heat pumps. But that's where programs like the community campaign, the Heat Smart Mohawk Valley comes in. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to help individuals tackle what it takes for their individual home. What's the best approach to do that? So,
yep. And when I post the webinar, I'll make sure to include everybody's contact info, right, as you provide, so that it's easy for them to follow up with more conversations. I do want to mention also quickly, if you currently use fuel oil as kind of a very quick interim step, is that you can do the 80-20 switch, 80 fuel oil, 20% biofuel. And I did speak this morning with one of our local providers, and as long as your company has that product, they basically, I was told that right now the cost is exactly the same as it is for regular, heating oil. that there's no additional maintenance that's necessary. I guess the blend is at the 20% point, doesn't cloud up the same way as like 100% biofuel would. And that there's not a lot of additional costs, and that there's also a tax rebate. And I'll share that information in the links resources, that if you're using 80/20 biofuel for your furnace, for a oil furnace, that you can take off 20 cents per gallon on your tax bill at the end of the year with New York State. So I don't see any reason not to call your local company if you're using fuel oil now and say, please switch me to 80/20 biofuel.
Yeah, so that's great. What I would strongly, the caveat I would put to that is, if you're, I would not buy a replacement fuel oil system if your old one's coming to the end of its life, to take advantage of that particular approach, really. So there, as I said, and I'm sorry, it's not easy for me to just come up with simple either visuals or descriptions of a long list of rebates and tax credits and incentives that help individual homeowners and building owners overcome the upfront capital cost. But what I showed you in terms of operational cost is the fact that you can save $2,000 a year with a heat pump versus a heat pump system for your house versus propane. Well, if you're replacing your furnace and it's good, if it was going to cost you $5,000 to replace your furnace, and it was let's say a $15,000 upcharge, $15,000 to put in a heat pump based system, that's a net upcharge of $10,000. And if you're saving $2,000 a year on the cost to heat your home, you've got a 5-year payback, right? So the only caveat I would say, I'm sorry for being long-winded, about the biofuel is, don't use that as an excuse not to look at heat pumps when your existing fuel oil system.
Oh no, not at all.
I know that's not what you were saying. I'm just saying that's every time, right? So heating systems are expected to last 20 to 25 years. So it's very rare that folks want to think about a replacement heating system if they bought one in the last 10, right? So when your system comes to the end of its life, that's the time to really explore heat pumps.
Right. Thank you, Bennett. I appreciate
Sure.
that. And I think we will kind of go into this further in a separate presentation with you, kind of specifically looking at some of these things, because I think it is important and helpful.
I tried to be short-winded. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Up a bunch of time. I can talk forever about this stuff. Sorry.
That's okay. We're going to move on a little bit to solid waste and recycling.
Sure. Do you have any question for me, or you want me?
Charlie, you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah, I'd be glad to. Shane, could you just start by talking about how does recycling and composting help reduce carbon emissions, since that's what this has been all about, really, is reducing carbon emissions?
Sure. I think that recycling and solid waste is one of the easiest ways that you can actually have an impact, because, I'm a renter, average income. I can't go buy a new Tesla. I don't really control the heating, although I can buy into the solar, but I can control what I buy and how I throw that out. And one thing I'm going to mention just quickly, most of the emissions coming from waste are actually methane. So there's two ways that emissions come from waste. There's the production side, which there's very little you can do about as a consumer. I mean, you can choose what you're buying. At the end of the day, you need to buy food, you need to buy clothes. What you can really control is the output side, and that's where the methane comes from. So when we send waste to a landfill, which in Otsego County, in Delaware County, Delaware County is a little different, but in Otsego County, that's where all the garbage goes. So out of 100% of things we throw away in Otsego County, 90% of that goes right to the landfill. So out of that landfill, and that is a pretty low rate. The national rate, I think, is around 30. We're trying to work that. We're trying to improve that. But out of the landfill, you have what's called landfill gas, and half of that is methane, half of that is carbon. There's some other products that come out of that. That's pretty much unavoidable. There's also leachate, and methane is actually 72 times plus more effective than carbon at trapping heat in the atmosphere. So it's actually a much more, it's a heavier gas. It's harder to, it's a much more impact gas. So if you reduce waste, that's going to change that. It's a simple way to say it. And where does that come from? That's mostly organics. So when you throw stuff in the trash, the plastics and stuff, obviously you should recycle. And I'm happy to talk about the whole recycling side of it. That's where I spend most of my time. But the organics, the food waste, that's 30% of the average American's garbage, approximately. That doesn't even account for all the waste that happens before it gets to your house. But 30% of your garbage is probably organic, whether it's a peel or even paper, things like that, that can decompose. And the problem is, if you go decompose that in your backyard composting, there'll be some carbon emission, and that's fine, and that will happen. But when you put it in the landfill, it's anaerobic conditions. Everything is packed in, it's sealed, so there's no air getting in. So what happens is all that turns into methane, which then heats the atmosphere. And so I guess I won't be too long-winded, but that's in the short way how it causes climate change. It is also carbon. There is carbon coming out of the landfills as well. There are creative things people do. I mean, I know some people might be from Delaware County. If you're in Delaware County, they process all their waste through basically a simple way to say it, a long heating tube, where they remove all the organic material and separate that from the true trash. So their actual landfill amount is I believe it's 12% or 10% of what actually people throw out. We don't have that facility here in Otsego, but anyway, that's the short answer for how it causes carbon and climate change.
Let's just ask a more skeptical question though. Does recycling actually happen? People always say, oh, well, you put all the stuff in the barrel and they take it away, but they probably just burn it anyway.
I'm going to be careful in my answer here, but if you give it to us, there's a couple things to watch here. And the biggest problem is not where people think it is. People think that we're just taking the recycler and mixing it all in and throwing it out. The biggest way you're losing out is if you put it in the recycling bin, you need to make sure your hauler is actually separating that recycling. That's the first thing I'll note, and not to point any fingers, but you need to make sure that when you put waste out on your street, that it ends up at whatever facility it's going to separated. That's a huge, huge problem, at least in this area. So that's the first thing I'll say. If you put it out and you see them put it in the same bin in the truck in the same container, we don't separate that. So when they say single stream recycling, it's not everything in all one bin. You have to separate recyclable material from garbage. On the second note, once we get it at the county, again, this is different depending on the county, but if you live in Otsego, Schoharie, Shenango, all that waste, all that recyclable material then gets sent to a MRF, which is a material recovery facility, and that's where they market it out. So if they have markets, they will recycle it. They might throw out some. If they don't, that we have very little control about, but it does get recycled. Sometimes it sits in shipping containers for a very long time until markets become available. Prior to I don't even know the year, but I think 2018, it was very easy because we could just ship all of our recyclable material to China, and they would take it basically for very low cost, and it would be very contaminated. They have since updated their quality control standards, where the amount of contamination that they will accept is incredibly small, and it's understandable because we were sending them a lot of trash in their recycling, and so that market has effectively closed for the U.S. And we are in this period where we're waiting for U.S. markets to open up, and they are doing that very slowly, but they are slowly opening up. So the short answer to that is if you send it to us, recycling, we do send it to a recycling facility. And then that does get recycled eventually. I think we're in a time right now in the US where we need more facilities to open up regionally and in North America. That is happening. I think the more interesting thing that's occurring is on the production side and extended producer responsibility. things like that, which I'm happy to get into, but I don't want to do that unless someone asks, because I'll take up too much time. But.
Thank you, Shane. It definitely helps. So hold your hauler accountable is what we want to know.
How does someone do that?
I think you watch and you call them if you see them.
So in New York State, each county, I'm speaking very Otsego centric right now, which I maybe should step back a little bit, but in New York State, each county is required to have a waste separation law of some sort, which at the base has to require that if a resident puts out waste for recycling, it gets recycled at the base. That is required in New York State, and it's enforced by the counties. So the level of enforcement that occurs obviously varies greatly. If you live in a county like Ulster, you're probably in pretty good hands. They have a pretty robust system. If you're in a more rural county, it's harder to keep track of everyone. I know I'll just speak for our county in Otsego. We're currently redrafting a law. We had one on the books in 1989, and we're creating a brand new recycling law. Hopefully it passes this year, which will enable us to track that and monitor it and enforce it. But yes, it is in New York State. You're lucky because it is required, but other states, I'm not sure.
Thanks. Can we move on to someone else now, Susan?
Yep.
Shall I ask Ellen a question?
Surely.
All right. Ellen, regarding shop local programs, how do they benefit us economically and in terms of carbon emissions?
Oh, you're muted. You have to unmute.
Gotta unmute.
Understand. Sorry about that. I have a dog that is angling to go out. But it's relatively simple. I mean, you keep the money, if you shop locally, you keep the money in the economy. The money circulates locally, generally $1 or $100 spent in a local independently owned business. $67 or $68 stays in the community. If it's at a big box store, it's more about $40. And if it's online, it's nothing or very little. We do actually collect sales tax if your address is Otsego County and you shop online, but there's very little benefit. The same is true with jobs generated. The same amount of money spent at a big box store doesn't generate the same number of jobs that spending that money at a small business, independently owned business would. And the profits obviously don't stay here either. The other benefit is that local businesses are the ones that sponsor the sports teams and donate to community fundraisers and really participate in the community. Carbon wise, depending on how you shop, you can really reduce your carbon footprint when it comes to shopping locally. I'm not saying tons and tons of carbon. I think Chandu is the expert on that. But I think if you are mindful about how you shop, running errands where you group your errands all together, using your own bags, choosing items that have little to no packaging. I honestly will go through the olive oil section of the market and tap all the bottles until I find the one that is more, glass is heavier, I understand that, but because we have Andella's that recycles our glass in county, I buy the glass. Because then the county doesn't have to ship it out to a recycling facility. So, that's the sort of thing that I try to do. We sponsor the farmers market, and we started that back in 1991 as a way to support local and sustainable agriculture within a 50-mile radius of the area. 100% of the products that are sold at the farmers market have to be produced locally by those farms. And we have the one or two exceptions, and that is stone fruits, because you can't have summer without peaches and plums, and they just don't grow in our climate yet. But otherwise, we are adamant that it has to have a small footprint. those farms, by and large, when we shop at the farmers market, because of the nature, we inspect our farms to make sure that they have safe and humane farming practices, sustainable farming practices. So they have a lower footprint in producing our food. Several of our meat farms are regenerative agriculture, biodynamic, certified organic, and regenerative agriculture is really regenerating the soil by its rotational grazing. It's using no pesticides or added fertilizers. It's really farming the soil so that it can produce high quality grasses to feed the animals. So, and most of those farms have more than one kind of animal. We don't have any monocultures, except for the mushroom guy. He's a monoculture, if we want to say that. So I think it's very important to think about where your food is coming from, even though food miles really don't matter as much in reducing carbon footprints because of the different methods of production. I think what you really need to understand is what methods of production are being used for the food you consume. Should that beef that you buy in the grocery store cost $2 a pound? There is no way on earth you could raise an animal humanely and sustainably and still charge $2 a pound for it. So somebody's getting the short end of the stick there, and it's generally not the middleman or the producer, it's the animal. So I think people need to think about that. The other aspect of shopping locally, at least that I have found, because I am terrible if I order something online, I can never get around to returning it if it doesn't fit or if it's the wrong product. I'm just really bad that way. So I really have to think, how much do I need this? Can I find it locally? And that is my incentive. You know, when I think if I really can't find it locally, how much do I really need it? So that's what I tend to do when I am shopping locally, is like, where's my money going? Do I need it if I can't find it within a 25-mile radius or a 50-mile radius? And then I do think, to go to Shane's point, I do think, because I take the recycling very religiously up to the transfer station, and it is one of my least favorite tasks. So when I see the boxes piling up from my tenants, I actually talk to them about the importance of shopping locally and the importance of reducing the amount of waste you generate, because it has to go somewhere. And again, that's true with any packaging, whether it's a toothpaste tube or an Amazon box that sends you one pack of toilet paper. It makes no sense. So have I answered? I'm sorry, I have a migraine. That's why my cheeks are super rosy. So if I've answered the question, great.
I think you've done a marvelously comprehensive job of answering the question. Wow. You mentioned the glass container for the olive oil. I make community trips up there on 28 to take the glass. I believe in it. Are there any other tips in the supermarket that you'd like to share with us?
From the supermarket? Well, obviously,
in our shopping.
I mean, I think, again, you have to really think about, if you can't shop at a farmer's market, if you're not fortunate, you know, I have to say right now, the green vegetables are few and far between at the farmer's market. We do have spinach, and lots of root vegetables, but I think when you do choose your green vegetables that you buy at the supermarket, think about how they get there. Are they really tender, you know, like delicate vegetables that need to be flown here, like asparagus, berries, grapes, things like that? Those need to be flown because they can't be preserved forever. Tomatoes, if they have to be flown, that is a huge carbon impact for that food item. Do you really need that asparagus in December? Or can you wait until April or May when it starts to appear in our markets? You know, eating seasonally is important. Eating meat as a flavoring, not as the main portion of the meal. Reducing your food consumption so that, as Michael Pollan says, eat food, mostly plants, not too much. And I think that's a really good point. I mean, Americans eat something like 10 ounces per person per day of meat. which is far more than we need in terms of animal protein. And that's a huge carbon footprint right there, especially if you're buying it at the grocery store, is how I would say it. So know your farmer, know your food, shop the outer aisles at the farmer's market, I mean, at the supermarket. And if you have to buy something that's in a package, think about how it's packaged.
Thank you, Ellen. If you need to go ahead and drop from the panel, I certainly understand, and I appreciate you kind of working through your migraine to wait until now.
Thank you.
Definitely very, very helpful. I do want to shift over to questions for Danny next, and then we'll take general questions. And I'm happy if there's interest or if there's a message that you think is really important, and I'll say this to everybody here on the panel, please let me know, because I'm happy to follow this up with kind of more in-depth look at any particular piece of this. I do think, you know, tonight is kind of touching those bases and seeing if we can address some questions, but I think there, you know, this is the spider web of rabbit holes where you can really go far down each one and really extrapolate a lot of information and things that are very helpful for people. So, so moving to Danny kind of as that last panelist, and then seeing if we have any additional questions, and then we'll go ahead and pause for this evening.
Do you want me to go ahead, Susan?
Yep, you can go ahead with questions for Danny.
Okay, Danny, so how are we doing locally? Where in the process are our local communities in addressing action toward reducing carbon emissions?
That's a wonderful question. I appreciate you asking that. In fact, I was just discussing this with our local elected officials during the Otsego County Chamber's State of the State breakfast, giving Bennett a shout out in particular. So right now in Otsego County, the county in a bipartisan way has recognized that climate change is a priority to be addressed. To that end, we took the Climate Smart Communities Pledge, I believe last year, and the vote was in fact bipartisan. In 2019, Otsego County created the Otsego County Energy Task Force, which is comprised of representatives from both the private and public sector, elected officials, volunteers, members of the public. And the goal is to foster a culture, a business-friendly climate, while positioning ourselves at the same time to keep in line with Governor Cuomo's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act and the Advancing Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act, which ostensibly replaces Article 10. This project will help kind of create a roadmap for Otsego County's 30+ municipalities to then, take their own actions to meaningfully address climate change through targeted reductions in their vehicle fleet emissions, for example, or usage of fuel oil to heat their town halls. In parallel, Otsego County worked with OCCA and Amy in particular to create a Climate Smart Communities Institute, which is basically an open forum for community leaders to come together and exchange ideas and learn how to take particular actions related to addressing climate change. New York State has extended a carrot to many communities known as the Climate Smart Communities Certification. This is a incentive where if communities take actions, meaning both in the past and in the present to address climate change, they can be more competitive for grant funding from anything ranging from infrastructure projects to energy projects, and to be considered, more favorably in New York's, ultra competitive CFA application process. To that end, in order to, take this program on meaningfully, many communities don't have the staff capacity necessary to form a Climate Smart Communities Task Force or jointly address climate change. You're dealing with part-time elected officials who often hold other full-time jobs. One of the good things that Amy, as CEC outreach coordinator, did, and we will hopefully continue to do through our Climate Smart Communities Institute is to foster a culture of community volunteerism. Basically empower local electeds and other interested volunteers to bring in their friends to get involved in helping towns take meaningful action on climate change. It's one thing to go to a meeting requesting, that a community do a greenhouse gas inventory, and it's another thing to spend, 8 Saturdays in a row, 5 hours a day to actually help your town clerk go through the utility bills and collect that data and then share it with myself or Amy or whoever else is on our task force. And so many, 11 communities have decided that they want to take the first meaningful step toward becoming certified as climate smart communities. They've set up their task force. Some have taken actions. Some are in the process of meeting. But that is a very, exciting step. That means over 1/3 of our communities are thinking about climate change and are taking action to address it. Our goal is to get every municipality to become at least bronze certified, hopefully. But that's kind of the main thing. And the other important thing to consider when we're talking about climate change in local governments is that New York's a home rule state. Each government is kind of empowered to regulate land use and pass laws and tax their citizens as they see fit. So the name of the game is coordination. We have to find a unifying message related largely to fiscal benefits and dedication to their sense of place or environment, and then push that message and get people working together, because the actions of one community can offset the actions of another. So the goal is you want to foster a feeling of consensus. And one of the best ways to do that is to entering our Climate Smart Communities Institute, where you see people from all over the political spectrum and ideological spectrum working together to address climate change. So that's kind of where we are at a high level.
Thank you, Danny. I am going to share your resource for municipalities on climate. I'll have that linked with our webinar and our links as part of the follow-up. Do you know of like other communities that just have stellar model programs?
Yeah, so the Village of Rhinebeck is a good one. Their Climate Smart Communities Task Force completed a natural resources inventory, which is a pretty challenging task to do, right? We actually were trying to poach one of their interns to come work for us on a separate project. And I did some research into their work and reviewed the report related to the natural resources inventory, kind of justifying the need for it. And they did a really good job. They have a coordination between the village and town governments. They're a relatively small village, and they have a very kind of entrenched local population who have, all sorts of views all over the spectrum, kind of. But they were able to advance many projects related to the Climate Smart Community certification and do a really good job. The other one would be the Village of Lake George. The Village of Lake George was smart. They had inadvertently, or maybe on purpose, done a lot of the actions that would get you points to the Climate Smart Community certification before they tried to apply. So they actually went retroactively and identified various projects and initiatives that they've implemented, tabulated them all and submitted them to the state, and that actually helped them get certification. And actually, curry public favor in showing that actually a lot of the things that they agreed with fight climate change, and that it's not some sort of politicized statement. It's more of a series of pragmatic decisions that both save money and protect the environment.
Nice. Very nice. Thank you.
There was a question that was asked. I'm not sure which panelist would address this question, but one of our participants is asking, are there any recommendations on ways to keep companies accountable for excessive packaging? And I know that's probably not you, Danny, but I didn't want that question to get lost.
Yeah, that looks like Shane.
Yeah, I can try to answer that. There's two ways to do this mainly that governments can do. And luckily we live in New York where this is being done to a certain extent. The first way is just banning types of packaging. So like New York has banned is proposing to ban styrofoam, polystyrene packaging. I think that's coming into effect in 2022. They're still drafting some of the regulations. They ban plastic bags. If you go check out the grocery store, there's no plastic bag there anymore. So you can just ban products, and that's something that California has sort of led the way with, and New York State. But the more innovative way I think to do it is extended producer responsibility, EPR programs. This is where Canada sort of leads the way, and so does California. New York is catching up, but this is where you essentially require companies to provide for the recycling of that material. So for example, in New York State, electronics are an EPR program. So if you recycle a TV, the company that made that TV is responsible for helping pay for its recycling. In New York, we have some other ones. We have paint coming up in 2022. So every paint can you buy, the company has to pay for it to be recycled. Pharmaceuticals, batteries, this exists in some sense. And also for, I already said e-waste, electronics. But yeah, so extended producer responsibility would be a way to do that. That doesn't exist for most things now. One stellar example would be British Columbia, Canada, where they basically privatize their entire solid waste system, but it's, they regulate it to effect that everything has to be essentially paid for by the companies that produce the material. So there's heavy subsidization, I don't know if that's a word, but there's heavy funding for recycling the material from the companies that actually make it. So there's certain packaging you just can't avoid. I mean, things have to come in plastic, and that's where I think Ellen had a good point. If you can buy local and avoid the Amazon box, that's a huge thing right there. I mean, that, so you can do certain things on your own, but at the end of the day, it's going to have to come from bans and EPR schemes. And there is some movement on the federal level to have a EPR. There's an EPR bill, I think, proposed by, I forget his Tom Udall, but I don't know if that's going to go anywhere yet. So
I always thought that a great citizen action effort would be to coordinate a Black Friday event where everyone who went to stores and shopped would leave their packaging at the point of sale. And can you imagine how inundated retailers would be that would have to prompt some kind of repercussion in packaging out there. But that was just my half-brained idea.
Susan?
Probably all get arrested for littering.
Right.
Susan, I just want to add to what Shane said, right? So yes, governments are considering EPR, and I hope all that comes about. But in the meanwhile, it's not as though we can do nothing. If there are products that are excessively packaged, don't buy them. Vote with your dollars. And on the theme of voting with dollars, if you have a retirement account, a mutual fund, a 401k, the way it's invested, you're voting with your dollars. Divest from those fossil fuel, funds. Ask for the ESG score of every investment that you're making. Ask your broker to tell you that they are the highest scores before you would invest. It's a smart financial decision. So anytime you buy a good, a service, invest in something, you are making a choice and you can influence the world more than you think.
Chandu, what was that score again? ESG,
it stands for Environment, Social, and Governance. And it basically rates a company or a fund on these categories of activities.
Beautiful. Well, I know we went about a half an hour over, and I know we've just touched the tip of the iceberg on all of these topics. So I would like to absolutely follow up with some more extensive, maybe, take each of our pieces apart and dedicate, an hour just to those topics. I don't know, I know that there's the value in the recording because now this lives on and can be shared. But it is so difficult, and I did mention this earlier, it's so difficult to market it. It's not a sexy topic. And if you have any ideas on how I can, make it to, get those, thousands of people within our region to kind of respond, that would be wonderful. We're very, very appreciative of our attendees tonight, and certainly for all of our panelists this evening and sharing your time and your expertise. And we definitely hope to follow up with each of you. If there may be a question or two that kind of is lost in the chat shuffle here, but is there any comments or anything else that any of our panelists might like to share? Things that we touched on or things that you want to add?
I just want to comment on what you said about this not being sexy. Truthfully, we are on the cusp of a sort of a new dawn and a new economy, and it's actually really pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And so I tend to, particularly in chatting with young people, I mean, the opportunities that exist to fix the problems that we created for them is overwhelming. And so I try to tend more towards optimistic and there's value in this, both financially and just sort of morally, right? And I think that there's an opportunity to really rally behind that. And so I just sort of want to put that positive spin on what we're all trying to accomplish here. I think it's actually very exciting.
Well, I appreciate the positivity, and I agree with you. It's exciting and it's interesting, and there's so much information out there. I'm trying to, through our Climate Leadership Network, I'm trying to kind of compile some resources for people to use. And certainly, one of the things out of this project that we want to do is actually support some projects moving forward. So we're looking, for, people who are participating with us. If there's something that you can think of that you can do in your communities to, take this a step further and do something meaningful locally, we want to help with that. And, we might be able to help with a little bit of funding or, helping find grants to get something bigger off the ground. If people just want to do, awareness campaigns and bring some awareness to some of these topics, or, advocacy, like learning how to talk about climate change generally to people. There's really, there's a lot of different opportunities. Native plant gardens I'll include in there, trees for tributaries, getting those waterways planted with things that protect the riparian zone and provide habitat as climate changes that will be needed moving forward. So there's a lot of different things. We also just, we have a contact with the NY2CL, the Youth for Climate Action in New York State, and they're starting what's called a Sunrise group in our region for those under 35 who are interested in taking action on climate change, and will hopefully be working with us on, maybe putting together some projects. So I have that information that I can send to anybody who might be interested. So if you know some younger people that are interested in doing some work, that, those are there. So yes, I'm excited about it, and I definitely appreciate the topic, and I'm definitely passionate about it. I'm having a hard time, kind of in how do I couch this to express that to other people so that they can get excited about it too. So if you have any ideas, please feel free.
That's the monumental Herculean task in front of all of us.
I've always thought if we build a new landfill, we should put it right on I-88 so everyone sees it every day and thinks about what they're throwing away.
I think what you need to do is to say that there's a 5,000 acre wind farm coming up in their backyard. That'll get them.
Hey,
Just by
Susan,
way
just
of
today,
encouragement.
I came across something. The city of Cambridge in Massachusetts requires a yellow sticker on every fuel pump saying that this substance causes climate change and is harmful to your health and so on. So I think we need carbon labeling like we have food labeling standards.
Yeah, I was in a town in Maine, like Lewiston, Maine, and they had charged for parking. They said, we charge for parking so you'll get out of your car and walk and reduce your carbon emissions from driving too much. And they had all these like statistics about how much emissions they've saved to the various businesses. And it was pretty cool. I liked it. I took like 10 pictures and my wife got really mad at me, so.
Nice. And I did just to check, we do have a comment in the question and answer that we're looking at what you're doing to help us with our work in South Central Pennsylvania, and with a thanks for putting the recordings out for members of their Ecology Action Committee. And I like that, just makes me so happy to see that. Because at least, what little we are able to do in the short term, there's impact out there, and that's just beautiful. And anytime you can do something that can be replicated and shared, I think just makes the reach of the effort go that much further. So thank you, Elizabeth.
Just by way of encouragement for folks that might be out there, I just wanted to put in my 2 cents as a consumer. My wife and I decided to go with community solar after listening to one of the presentations at an Audubon meeting. It was perfectly easy to do. We save money on our electricity. You get a 10% rebate. Plus they gave us a $50 gift certificate. And they covered all of our electricity except for NYSEG charges us $15.58 every month for their basic connection charges. Now we have just recently decided to just take the plunge, and we added heat pumps to our house. We used to heat with gas, forced hot air. We now basically don't use the gas furnace almost at all. And we just heat the house with heat pumps, and it's really wonderful. And that way, we're heating our house with community solar electricity. It's pretty cool.
That's beautiful, Charlie. Thank you for sharing that. Good. Okay, so I think we will go ahead and wrap this up and say our good nights and thank yous to everybody. So until next time, we'll hope to see you soon, and definitely I'll be following up with our panelists to go from here and see what ideas you might have for how we can proceed from here for more information from you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you,
Thanks for putting this
Susan,
on.
for
Yeah,
organizing
Yes,
this.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
Great night.
Everybody.
great job.
I know.
Thank you, Susan. Take care.
Thanks.